Genesis is the first book of the Bible. It tells us all about the creation of the world, the early days of humanity, the beginning of the Hebrew people, and God's covenant with them. But it can also teach us a bit about something that happened much later than the events described in the book. I'm of course talking about the life of Jesus Christ. There are multiple passages found in Genesis that foreshadow the life and death of Jesus, some of which you may have never considered. The first of these instances of foreshadowing is found in Genesis 3:15, just after the fall of man due to the deception of the devil. In it, God says to the serpent, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." This is known as the Protoevangelium, or the first gospel. This verse foresees the coming of a man, a descendant of Eve, who would defeat the serpent, bruise his head, and who would be bruised by the serpent on the heel. This is a clear prophecy of Jesus, who defeated Satan by his resurrection and who was bruised by his crucifixion. Of course, the serpent being bruised on the head is a symbol of his complete defeat, while the man being bruised on the heel is a symbol of Jesus' crucifixion, but not defeat, but also resurrection. The next foretelling of Jesus in Genesis is not quite as clear as the Protoevangelium. This second example is found in chapter 22, which tells us about the testing of Abraham. It's a well-known story, but here's a quick summary. God comes to Abraham one day and tells him to go to Mount Moriah and sacrifice his only son, Isaac. Abraham, having faith that God would fulfill his promise to create a nation through Isaac, despite this command, obeys instantly. On the way, Isaac asks his father, "Where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answers, "My son, God will provide himself a lamb for the burnt offering." This is a clear allusion to Jesus, who is called the Lamb of God in the New Testament, who is provided by God himself for a sacrifice for sin. However, the parallels go even deeper than this. After God tells Abraham not to sacrifice Isaac, Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. The sacrifice given by God to Abraham in the place of his son was caught in a thicket, likely with thorns. Now in the New Testament, we learn that when Jesus was crucified, he was given a crown of thorns on his brow. Not only did God provide the lamb himself in both instances, but both had thorns on their heads before death. Another piece of foreshadowing is found in Genesis 28:12 with Jacob's dream. Jacob, on his way to Haran from Beersheba, was given a dream from God in which he saw a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven, and behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. Now this instance of foreshadowing might not be so clear until we take a look at John 1:51 in the New Testament. Here Jesus says, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, hereafter ye shall see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." The phrase, "the angels of God ascending and descending," is used to describe both the ladder to heaven and the Son of Man, who is Jesus. This shows us that Jesus is the ladder to heaven, the only way to enter into the presence of God, who is in heaven. Next, we're going to take a look at the story of Joseph, Jacob's son. Near the end of Genesis, Joseph is sold into slavery in Egypt by his 11 brothers. While in Egypt, he becomes a great man in the eyes of Pharaoh and is given power over much of his kingdom. However, he is eventually falsely accused by Potiphar's wife and is sent to prison. Eventually, he is restored to a high position, but it's clear that Joseph suffered a lot as a result of his brothers' actions. However, when there's a large famine in the land, Joseph's brothers come to Egypt to get food, because Joseph was warned about the famine and prepared for it. Joseph offers salvation to his family who sold him into slavery, and forgiveness and love despite what they did to him. All of this makes Joseph a type of Christ, or a person who shows qualities or circumstances similar to Jesus, in this case to his role as the suffering servant. Jesus, like Joseph, suffered at the hands of his people, but he also offered them salvation, which he was able to give them as a result of his suffering, just like Joseph was able to give his family salvation from the famine only because he was in Egypt after they sold him as a slave. Joseph shows us a similar though less extreme circumstance to Jesus, and also his qualities of love and forgiveness. Finally, we'll take a look at the last and perhaps most obvious example of how Genesis foreshadows Jesus. This example is another direct prophecy, this time told by Jacob to his son Judah. In this prophecy, Jacob says, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be." This prophecy might not seem so obviously about Jesus until we look at what the name Shiloh means. The Hebrew name Shiloh means to be at ease or the peace giver. Now when we look at Isaiah 9:6, the Messiah is called the Prince of Peace. Not only that, but Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judah, the same tribe from which Jacob said the scepter would not pass until Shiloh arrived. After taking a look at these passages, it is clear that Genesis isn't just about the beginning, but also foreshadows Jesus, the one who bruised the serpent's head, the Lamb of God, the ladder to heaven, the suffering servant, the Prince of Peace. Not only do these passages show us some interesting examples of foreshadowing, but they also show God's love for us. As early as the fall of man, when humanity first failed him, God already had a plan in place to bring us back to him, and wasted no time foretelling the end of it. From the very beginning, God had a plan to give us a second chance.